For a long time, Ines has been the go-to when it comes to fast farming in the first Descendant, so much so that Nexon wants to nerf her down to Freyna's level. But with the arrival of Arche Tuning boards, it feels like it's going the complete opposite direction of that, with buffs to skill builds found within it when it's built properly. So much so that this Ines build can rock a 7.3x multiplier on skill crit damage, with even more base skill power to throw around than ever before. Safe to say that Ines isn't going away anytime soon. So in today's video, we'll be looking at my build that I use for Ines, talking the full build that works for both mobbing and bossing, what pieces of gear that you need to be able to get this together, what's changed since before, and how to use the new Arche Tuning boards to push it to new heights. Of course, if all that sounds good to you, then let's get to it. So let's start talking about the module side of things and just quickly recap what the skills and how the build all kind of comes together. The best place to be able to start here is going to be her passive, which is going to be Plasma Oscillation. Kind of boils down to the fact that we kind of want to go into as much MP as possible. We don't want to hit this as like in any kind of way if we can kind of avoid it, but we also want to go into things like range and also the fact that we can build it into a critical hit descendant because of how the crit rate kind of works out with this. So essentially the more max MP that we do have, the more critical hit rate that we do have, which we will be showing off in things like the Arche Tuning as well as components and things like that. But then also we do extra damage with Dark Current based on our max MP as well as our damage multipliers, which come from all of our skill critical hit rate and our max MP once again. Now when it comes to her skill 1 and her skill 4, we essentially want to lean into range as much as possible, but mostly for her skill 1, because this affects the amount of times that this skill bounces every single time you cast it. You can see at base this does bounce at 4 times, but with this current build and with everything to do with the reinforcement and everything, we do get up to 7 times every single time we cast this, meaning that we get from 4 bounces all the way up to an extra 3 just for free, just from casting this ability, which is fantastic. Every single time this bounces and it affects another enemy though, that doesn't have Conductor applied to it, it will apply it, and Conductor is then going to give us Plasma, which then allows us to be able to use our skill 4, but it also sets them up so they take more damage from additional skills that come their way. And then lastly, moving on over to our skill 4 is going to be Snare Hunter, which is going to be a projectile that we throw out, doing a massive AoE, and is going to be the main way of being able to do mobbing when it comes to Ines. This one also gives us a nice little movement speed, which is quite nice, but the main thing to note with this one is that going into range does help us, similar to like how a skill 1 works, but not to the same degree. It doesn't actually do as much damage, but it does help us out with current coils, which as you can see usually affects 3 monsters, but is going to affect 7 monsters with the amount of range that we do have with this build. So let's wrap it up when it comes to the module side of things. We do have the Time of the Hunting Counts, which is a fantastic red Transcendence mod for herself. It does a lot of things, but the main thing is that it changes her skill 1 into a stackable ability, but also transforms it into a tech ability. It also does this for a skill 3, but we don't really care too much. But tech is fantastic because we're able to spam this out to high heavens because of that ridiculously low cooldown, and that allows us to be able to use a specific weapon, which helps us out with extra damage, extra skill power into the build, but it means that we can also lean into just tech if we want to, which does really work nicely when it comes to the reactor side of things, because that means that our skill 1 and our skill 4 are going to benefit from all that extra kind of skill power that's going to be coming our way. We are also going into cooldown, so we have gone into MP conversion and nimble fingers to be able to get the most out of it. While it does technically mean that we are losing max MP, which is going to be hurting our critical hit rate, we do have more than enough when it comes to the build, so you don't need to worry too much. It's definitely worth being able to get the skill cooldown here, and it's worth that sacrifice. We do follow that up with focus on electric, which is going to give us even more cooldown and going into that electric skill power, so we do even more damage with our abilities. We've gone into range with skill expansion and maximize range, and maximize range is going to hurt our skill power modifiers. You'll notice this more on our skill 4 with all the little like electric tendrils that will come off, but this is more than enough for essentially what we need it to be able to do. But going into more range is absolutely worth it to be able to benefit from our skill 1, so that's why we do that. And then we've also got the critical hit package, which we do have here, which is emergency measures, skill concentration, and front lines. While we do have a lot into critical hit damage, you'll notice that we do not have skill insight to be able to help us out with the critical hit rate. And there's a reason for that, is because as you can see here, without anything in our reactor to help us out, we are sitting at 95.3%. But if we do go into our reactor and we use the one that I primarily use when it comes to the mobbing side of things, as you can see here, do have a skill critical hit rate roll. This now puts it up to 100%. So we do not need skill insight. It would be a dead module, would be a dead slot inside this build, so you do not need that to be able to do the most. So the last module slot that's going to be for this build is going to be Hyperfocus. Now, the reason why I've gone for this one, I've noticed a few of the builds in the community have gone for things like Potent Collector. So if we just have a quick look at that one, it gives you a chance of being able to get some of your custom resource back, which is going to help you out with your plasma, so you can cast your skill 4 a little bit more often. But it's such a low chance, and to be fair, I'd rather have something that I can personally control. But on the other side of things, because of the range that you've gone into with the build and then going into Snare Hunter, you're essentially, with all the enemy spawns that do have, you've got a fantastic way of being able to get yourself back up to max plasma anyway. So I'm not entirely sure why people kind of recommend that to you. I do think that's potentially a bad shout, to be fair. So therefore, I have gone for something that I do think is a bit more consistent. It's something that you can control, and it's absolutely valuable, and that is going to be Hyperfocus. And we're going to most notably focus on that the last bit of that. So landing a firearm critical hit rate grants Arche Focus, which is skill critical hit damage plus 46% for 15 seconds. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a fantastic number in of itself. 46% is definitely noticeable. But the real reason I wanted to kind of show this one off is just kind of show you how much damage this does get itself up to. As you can see here, with that critical hit damage reactor that I do have, I'm sitting at just shy of 5.6x when it comes to critical hit damage. If I use this gun here and I just land a critical hit, I'm now sitting at 7.3x. It is a huge amount of increase to the amount of damage that you will be dealing with that skill critical hit, and because we're at 100% critical hit rate, we're going to be doing this pretty consistently across the board. So therefore, I do think that Hyperfocus is something that you can control. You're going to be setting up with focus rounds anyway to be able to reduce resistance for elements and stuff like that. So therefore, Hyperfocus is absolutely worth that slot. Now, the only change that I would potentially make to this build is if you're going into a bossing environment. So for example, Defiler does make his way back into the rounds, and you will then be going into that. You'll absolutely be wanting to try out Dangerous Ambush. The only downside, I can't say for certain that this is going to be the way to be able to go for that build. And the reason why is because we've only got him access to him in the laboratory. As far as I can tell, the laboratory doesn't allow him to be able to get stunned. It doesn't actually allow him to go into an immobilized state. So therefore we don't know how much of an extra bonus that 49.8% of skill power is actually going to be compared to the amount of bonus that we'd get from Hyperfocus. But to be fair, you just essentially put another catalyst on this slot and you just swap those back and forth, just be able to test that out. If Defiler does actually come back into the fray, I'm pretty sure we're a couple of bosses away until that kind of happens, but if he does actually come back into it, that's something I'm going to potentially try out, but that's essentially, that's the only change that I would make to this if you were going into a bossing build. Now, swapping on that over to the reactor side of things, as you can already see, I have talked about going into skill critical hit rate and critical hit damage. That does give you the consistency to be able to get a 100% critical hit rate. You don't necessarily need it, but obviously it does actually help. It's consistent enough at 95% anyway, so you don't need to worry about it too much. But if I was to actually say what the best in slot was going to be, unfortunately I don't have it as a tingling mechanics, but I do have an example to show you, and that is going to be this one here, which does have the roles of skill cooldown and skill critical hit damage. That's going to give you the best of both worlds. That's going to help you out with being able to spam all of your abilities, especially with your Snare Hunter, which is your skill 4, and it's also going to benefit from all that critical hit damage, which is going to help out with Hyperfocus as well. So I do think this is best in slot. I am still currently on the hunt for that one to be able to help me out with this build, but still, if you manage to get a critical hit rate and critical hit damage, that is still fantastic to be able to help out. When it comes to the bossing side of things though, you still want to be able to go for your skill cooldown and additional skill attack when attacking Colossus. I do think this is still going to be best in slot for that side of things, so once Defiler does come back, this will be the reactor that you want for that. Yeah, those are pretty much the only ones that I would ever suggest for this build. One trap that you could potentially fall into is that you could see something like a range roll on your reactor and go, that might be able to help me out with an extra bounce. As far as I can tell, at least with all the testing that I've been able to pull off, I've not been able to push it from 4 to 7 bounces to then to go from 4 to 8 with a reactor that does have that on. I've not personally been able to do that. I've even tried it with the reinforcement for the seasonal side of things that helps out with skill range. It can't seem to be done that way as far as I can tell, so therefore it's not worth being able to go into that. So therefore, if you do think that's going to be the case, I can assure you that's not going to be. Now, when it comes to the component side of things, the Slayer is still the best set to be able to go for. While it does technically increase your skill cost, especially with the plasma side of things, it's still more than enough to be able to actually justify it, especially with the extra skill power that we're going to be getting from that set. There are a couple other sets I would like to be able to test out. Unfortunately, Unpredictable is pretty much as it says on the tin. It would be fantastic with the skill power one, especially with the skill cost as well, so giving us a bigger boost than what Slayer does, and also with that skill cost. But unfortunately, because we can't predict it and it only has a 33% chance of being able to appear compared to the other two options that do happen, it's just not worth being able to go for. If you wanted to go into more cooldown, you absolutely could go for your bravery side of things, but I still think that Slayer is pretty much the best one to go for, and you have more than enough cooldown when it comes to the rest of the build, and especially when we go into the Arche Tuning. Speaking of Arche Tuning, let's start talking about the builds and the best way that I would recommend that you start building up your boards. This is going to be the best path that I would recommend for the mobbing side of things. This allows you to be able to go across to getting extra skill power. This node recently got changed, so you will be seeing a little bit more damage than other builds that you've potentially seen out and about. Yeah, they took away the 10% modifier to be able to change it into additional skill power, which is fantastic. It's really nice extra damage that's going to be across the board. Head upwards to skill duration. You manage to grab your critical hit rate, you manage to grab your critical hit damage, grab your cooldown, and then head your way over here for max MP, which helps you out with, once again, more critical hit rate. Hold it all the way down so you get your skill power. Go into your range, which technically isn't needed too much. It does affect additional targets for your snare on your wider ability side of things, but it's not going to affect how many targets that you can hit with your skill 1, for example. But since this is the mobbing build, it makes more sense to go for that than going for the skill attack when attacking Colossus. So we do go that route, and then lastly we just grab the enhanced skill power. When it comes to the bossing side of things, we do change this up slightly, and the reason why is because we do not need that extra range there, so we will be grabbing the additional skill attack when attacking Colossus. We do most of the things still pretty much the same, but we do save a few points, and then we grab the max MP at the top, because we will be going into a different reactor than one that does have the critical hit roll. So therefore, if we go for this one, it allows us to be able to get a little bit more consistent with those critical hits. So therefore I do think this is the best kind of build for that side of things as well. So when it comes to the weaponry side of things, the only weapon that you should ever have equipped is going to be the Secret Garden. The Secret Garden is a fantastic weapon to be able to use because we have changed all of the abilities into tech. Now if we go over to the details screen, just in case you're not too sure as to how this one works, when you're casting a tech skill you get a chance of being able to get pest control. If you get this at max ranks, this goes up to 50%, and it also gives you a huge increase to your skill power per stack that you do manage to get. So therefore you are adding additional skill power into all the damage of all your abilities, and this is what makes Ines so strong and why Time of the Hunting Hounds is a fantastic mod to be able to change her skill 1. So you're able to spam out her skill 1, be able to build up a bunch of stacks, then you can use your snare to be able to get all the extra damage that's going to be benefiting from all these stacks as well. So the Secret Garden is also a fantastic weapon to go into Hyperfocus as well, and the reason why is because at base it does have a critical hit rate of 50%. This is something that you can increase even further with your substats when it comes to your rolls. So as you can see here, I do have my critical hit rate there. And then when it comes to the build side of things, this is the one that I would personally recommend, because you will be going into critical hit rate as much as possible. So you will be going into your insight focus, you will be going into your better insight. Brisk walk is a fantastic thing to increase the amount of speed that you do have going through dungeons and everything like that, which does trigger on your skills as well, because you primarily won't be using this ability to, or this gun to be able to actually do some shooting or to be able to reliably deal damage. You will be relying on your skills, so therefore you do have this to be able to help you out, and then the rest of the modules just kind of make it up so that you can do a little bit of damage just to be able to help, but you will be primarily relying on your skills. If you do have that, that does get you up to an 81.75% firearm critical hit rate. This gun does fire in a 4-round burst, so pretty much always guarantees every single time you fire that you pull that trigger that you're going to be getting a critical hit amongst that, and then you're going to get the benefit of all that stuff when it comes to Hyperfocus. If you do want to focus on things like cores when it comes to this, I would recommend anything to increase your mobility, but you can also go into critical hit damage as well because it does have that 1 red mod. So sprint speed as well as grappling hook charge time is going to be fantastic rolls to be able to get into this gun. And then just wrapping it all up, let's start talking about the Inversion Reinforcement, because we do have some really fantastic things here to kind of help us out. We do go for the hunt side of things, we do go for neural focus augmentation. As we're defeating enemies, we can get up to an additional 4% increase to our max MP, which once again filters into the critical hit rate that we do have. So if you don't have a critical hit rate reactor, this is going to be the best one to be able to help out. It's also going to help out fantastically if you do have a skill cooldown as well as skill critical hit damage. So this one will then help you get so it's a bit more consistent, maybe even up to that 100%. We do have anything to do with the focus rounds, just match this to whatever task that you're going to be going into. So for example, if you are going into the new Sigma sector, I would recommend 5 focus rounds. That's going to give you the most amount of damage, but you can match this to any elements that you need to be able to do. This is going to help you out with enhanced focus rounds because you will be shooting your gun to activate hyperfocus. You're going to be getting it to be able to activate this so that you can then reduce attribute resistances so that you do more damage. Fantastic for being able to go against bosses. Recovery wise, selective neurostimulation seems seems to be potentially the best way to be able to go for this one. That's going to give you a way of being able to recover some of your MP every now and then, so you don't have to worry about woes. Ines doesn't really have that too much, but it's still something that you need to be able to factor in every now and then, and that's definitely going to help you out. And then lastly, if you manage to max out Quantum Domain, this is going to give you additional skill effect range and skill power, so meaning you're going to be hitting even harder, and as soon as you're going to be spamming those skills out, it's really easy to get up to those 15 stacks. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up on my breakdown of the new and improved Ines. Overall, she's still the best skill-based mobbing character in the game, even with Serena doing a lot of work currently. Until any changes make their way into the game for Ines, and if you're in need of a speedrun to get materials and modules, she should be your go-to right now. But this is a section I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Season 2, Episode 2 so far? How do you feel about the new Arche Tuning boards? And lastly, which descendant do you want to see get a new build guide down next? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video, and as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, I'll see you all on the next video.